Hello, everyone, and welcome to Creative Cake Design. We are super excited to have Elisa Strauss on our set today to talk with us all about hyper-realistic cakes. Elisa, welcome.
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here.
Yes, we're excited to have you. As I mentioned, I know you are in the studio this week and you have a gorgeous cake in front of you. Tell us a little about what you're doing in the studio today.
Well, I am teaching a video with all about tips and tricks of how to make your cakes realistic. I use a hamburger cake to demonstrate a lot of those techniques, from making the bread look like real bread and getting the ketchup the right color and making red onion and lettuce out of wafer paper. So a lot of new techniques that even I didn't know 20 years ago when I started cakes.
Yes, 20 years ago. So, first of all, let me say your hamburger cake is amazing. It looks like the real thing. I am blown away every time I see your cakes, and they're just absolutely fabulous. And this one just blows my mind. It is absolutely gorgeous, so pretty. You've got such amazing colors and textures and just so many realistic items happening. I seriously cannot wait to take this class.
Oh, I don't know that you need it, but you're nice.
Well, I'm a firm believer that you are always able to pick something up along the way, no matter what level of decorator you are.
Yes.
So,
Well, I appreciate the compliments because my 13-year-old tells me that I'm not creative at all and that I just replicate real things at a cake.
well, that is an art and definitely something that takes a lot of skill to be able to do. So it is not that you're not creative by any means. I know that some people probably, think, oh, no big deal. You're just trying to emulate what's there. And that's true. You're just emulating what we would normally see, but it takes a serious amount of skill in order to be able to actually replicate it in a way that is 100% like the real thing. So do you have any like real tips about trying to emulate what is in front of us and what we see and how to make them realistic?
Of course, sure. I mean, going back years ago, I was making a cake for a food critic, and I was like, what can I make a food critic that would really stand out? And I made a plate of sushi. And I remember walking out of my bakery in New York City, because we didn't have a car, and I went right into the local grocery store and bought sushi that I probably would have never eaten. But the point is, anytime you can have a model of what you're doing, and this doesn't just happen with food. I mean, to be honest, food is the easiest to get your hands on usually, right? But one New Year's Eve dinner, I made the Titanic, and I remember, you can look at two-dimensional drawings, but it's much easier to have a 3D version. And so I went out and bought a little toy model so that I can really get all the different measurements. So really the biggest thing is to have a model. And then, as I tell all my students, whether it's in pastry school or on creative cake design, it's really about looking at the details. So, before you've never really noticed stitching on the handbag, or like my favorite part of the burger is, the end part of the bun. You just won't look at the world the same way.
Agree 100% with that. And the details, I know there's a cliche, it's all in the details, but it truly is when it comes to trying to make a hyper realistic cake. That is number one, I think, is just making sure you're capturing all those unique details. So
yeah, and I also think that it's not, yes, obviously both of us have been making cakes a long time, but it's almost less about skill and more about patience, right? Because now more than ever, there's so many things to help, right? There are silicone mats and other textured things and, you know, other online videos that you can watch for different components of a cake. But it's really just not rushing through those details.
Agreed. I think one of the things that people struggle with is just the amount of time that some of these
Yes.
cakes take. What would you say is your average amount of time that goes into something like this? And I know it's different for every cake.
Oh my God. Yeah, it's different for every cake. And also it's different for every person, like what your satisfaction level is. And also, you know, I'm not saying I shortchange my family, but am I making a pizza burger cake for my brother, or am I making it for a client that's paying me? So, you know, it may be, I may obsess over the details a little more, or even when I teach, you know, a class or a video, I want it to be just perfect. But I think it's important to note that even though they look realistic, they should taste great. So if I was to describe the whole process, I mean, it's anywhere between 30 and 40 hours, but that shouldn't scare people away. That is including research, you know, scouring the internet. Again, I'm dating myself, but when I graduated pastry school and I worked at Cheryl Kleinman Cakes, I remember her going to the printer to make a photocopy of things she saw out of the book, and then she had almost like a file catalog that she would have things like car, food, you know, things that she could pull on because no one used Google, right? Yeah. So I'm not saying it's much easier now, but it's much easier. So I'm doing that, you know, I'm doing my research, I'm doing the baking from scratch, making the frostings, fillings, and all of that stuff.
Absolutely. I mean, I think the resources that we have today versus 20 years ago is just, I mean, there's no comparison whatsoever. We just have everything at our fingertips right now, and makes cakes a whole lot easier to achieve when we're just beginners, which I think is fantastic for, of course, everybody out there, all of our viewers, our students, just the general population. I think truly anyone can pick up a skill set these days. It doesn't have to be cake in particular, but I think any skill set is at our fingertips at this point because of the resources we have, which you know, kudos to all of us who forged the way through no internet to do what we needed to do. But yeah, it definitely is one of those things that today's generation of cake decorators are very, very fortunate.
Well, I remember, you know, Anne Heap, who's a dear friend from Pink Cake Box, she used to say in her bakery that her employees would balk if she just brought white fondant. You know, she used all the satinized colors, pre-dyed. I mean, I remember making a huge car cake and having to sit there and dye black fondant. I mean, I don't think there's anything worse than that.
Yes.
So, I mean, even with the burger cake, you know, the chocolate brown, it's ready to go. That can save you, you know, anywhere between a half hour and an hour.
Agreed. 100% agree with that. Yeah, between the resources to be able to learn and the resources just to be able to grab something quick, like colored fondant. And even, I know you use some of the marvelous molds in your class this time around as well. I mean, those things just were non-existent. We were grabbing all sorts of different textured papers and plastics and anything we would get from the grocery store, like egg crates and apple crates and things, just to be able to try to find some sort of texture that might work to achieve our goal with our cake. So yeah, well, let's back up just a moment, because we have a question about how you got started in decorating in general. So why don't you tell us just a little bit about your backstory?
Okay. Well, I went to college. I studied art. And then when I graduated college, I actually started working in fashion as a textile designer. So not exactly the food route, but it did really influence me because of colors and designs, all that stuff. So I was working at Ralph Lauren. Then I jumped to Frederick Fekkai and started dealing with their accessories line. So that was amazing. But, you know, since I was a little girl, loved to bake. I think that, and then the combination of my parents used to take me to a store in New York City that was called Think Big. And so they were known for, you know, now you see it at tennis events, those huge tennis balls, but they would have all sorts of things. Like my dad was an orthopedic surgeon, so there would be a screw that would be about 2 feet long. So all these influences and the love of feeding people led me to go to pastry school. So I did do that, and I feel like that's amazing because it teaches you to read a different language, and you get to meet many like-minded people. And then, to be honest, it's just a lot of trial and error. I mean, when I started, I don't think the hyper-realistic craze was there. I remember loving Colette Peters. I even went and met her in New York City and begged her for an internship. And she was like, "You're working in fashion. Why would you leave your very, you know, good career?" She was very nice, but I just kept, you know, reading her books and making cakes for people, sort of like I would walk around with a little photo book and show, like, this is my hobby. And then, I don't know, they all just came together. I met someone who was a writer for a magazine, and I said, "Oh, I do this on the side." And then I was lucky enough working in fashion to have some high profile clients. So I was hired to do Ralph Lauren's 60th birthday cake. So we're going way back.
Right.
And so, you know, all those things, and honestly, the hustle of starting a company before social media, it's kind of funny to think of me sitting in Barnes & Noble and looking at mastheads of magazines and then trying to send people postcards of my cakes.
Sure. Yeah, different world, that's for sure.
So that was the very beginning.
Yes. And you mentioned Colette, and I, of course, adore her. And having come into the industry just shortly after you did, being in the industry for 19 years now. So you're not that far ahead of me, but
I'm older. You can say it. I think it's over 20 years, but anyway.
We're closer than you think. Yeah, but I remember I lived in Connecticut when I got started, and I went down and met Ron Ben Israel, and I know you have a history with him as well. That was a pretty exciting moment for, I think, any cake decorator at that time trying to get into the industry. You know, Colette and Ron were some of the top people in the industry that we all sort of look to. And tell me a little about your experience with Ron.
Well, Ron is just amazing for so many reasons. One is just, as an individual, he's larger than life and so personable. And he's Uncle Ron to my kids. But the thing I think, the two things that make him so special are, one, his longevity in the industry. I mean, people burn out, right? You start a cake business, and then a lot of us turn to, whether you're doing books or teaching, or we take a break to take care of our families. He has just had amazing longevity in the industry. And the second thing I'd say is that, you know, a lot of people are amazing at sculpted cakes, and there are a lot of people that are amazing at wedding cakes, but he has that rare gift to really do both so well. So that's, I mean, that's the thing that blows my mind about his cakes. You'll never see a cake that's not perfect.
Sure, sure, absolutely. And I agree with you.
And then just on a personal level, you know, it's like in any industry, it's fun to have someone that's, you know, your contemporary, someone you can talk about cake recipes with. Like, my husband does not care, you know, and he doesn't want to hear about if I had an interesting day with, you know, certain clients or event planners. But, you know, Ron's experiencing life at the same way I am.
Yeah.
Minus 3 kids.
True. I think it's so important for, I know oftentimes I find that people feel as though everybody is a competitor instead of a friend and someone you can go to for advice or just to share experiences and know that you're not alone. And I think that's really important. So I know that I have my handful of go-to cake decorators and designers that I just adore and reach out to as well. And I think it's really important that we have a community like both creative cake design and Craftsy for people to be able to network together and chit chat about cakes and talk about, you know, what works or what doesn't work or what tastes good and what combination works or whatever it might be. So, you know, I hope that people find that sense of community wherever they are, but hopefully here as well.
No, absolutely. Right. I mean, the world of creative cake design and Craftsy has just, I mean, I've talked to cake designers across the world in India. You know, it was never possible before. Sure, I'm talking to my friends in New York, but it has made the world so much smaller.
Agreed, agreed. I feel like we can truly just reach out and touch someone wherever we are. So yeah. All right. We have another question. This one's from Becky, and she is asking, have you ever had anyone request a realistic cake for a wedding cake? So not as a groom's cake. And if so, what was it?
Absolutely. I have to say those are my favorite because and I mean, I shouldn't even say this because I had 3 wedding cakes that were fairly traditional, but it says a lot about the couple, right? The wedding is a formal event in general, but I have had people anywhere from sculpting their dog, which is so sweet, to making a replica of a mansion that the people were getting married in. So I did this one cake. It was called Jedediah Hawkins. It was out on, if you know Long Island, which is where I'm from, out by the beach. Not the Hamptons, but the other side. But they, you know, I had Pantone colors to match the shutters. And, you know, I remember a team of 5 of us working on that cake, you know, night and day. Obviously, you can't make a cake weeks ahead of time. So it's always a pressure cooker. But that was a really fun cake, stressful and fun.
Agreed. I think, at least from my experience, creating things that are very well known to others are probably the most challenging. I find wedding cake to be, obviously it depends on what we're making, right? But they tend to be a bit more straightforward. And when we get into the 3D sculpted cakes, especially when we're making something that's so obvious, like a mansion, for instance, it just becomes harder and harder and harder to achieve the right look because it's recognizable, right? Like people know what it's supposed to look like. And so the pressure is on. Like you said, the pressure is definitely on to try to create something that others can truly recognize and say, oh, that dimension looks a little off. We don't, you know, you don't want that. So it's meticulous and time consuming to do buildings, for instance. Those are my least favorite.
Yes, buildings and cars. I like to say that, you know, if you think of those kits where you put together toy cars. Think of all the little pieces. You have to make all those pieces out of, sugar or cake. And then on the flip side, sometimes the simplest designs are so difficult because if you get, one of the three elements wrong, and kids are the ones who, if you're making an Elmo cake, there aren't that many elements in it, right? There's the fur, there's the eyes, and there's the nose. And if you don't get that triangle of nose to eye ratio, some kid's gonna call you out on it.
Yeah, absolutely. 100% agree with that one. Oh,
especially
goodness.
my kids.
Yes. Fantastic. What would you say has been your most difficult cake that you've ever made?
Oh my goodness.
I know, I'm
I
sorry.
would have an answer.
Some memories.
What was the most difficult cake? Oh man. I mean, I would say it's kind of a cop-out to say, but any cake where I was making it for a competition. So on the Food Network, making, the Revenge of the Sock Monkey, the 6-foot-tall sock monkey. I think I was just telling someone the other day that I had an electric turntable that was supposed to go inside the cake, like to support the head, and it was supposed to spin. And then I had dry ice to make it look like the sock monkey was steaming. I mean, that is just so difficult from start to finish because, again, it's 6 feet tall. You need the structure. So you're planning things that are, you can't make a mistake. And then you have the pressure of cameras in front of you and, all that, and the clock's going.
Yes, absolutely. I think when it comes to the mechanical pieces within some of these cakes, those most certainly elevate the difficulty and that challenge that comes into play with creating a cake that moves or has dry ice or whatever it might be. Like it's next level. That's for sure. Very, very complicated.
And the thing about those is that, I was thinking about this when you said, before we had things like silicone molds, if you're using something, let's say you're using an egg carton, if someone's going to eat that cake, you don't want the sugar or the cake to touch that egg carton. So it's the same thing. Like, not only did I have to figure out how to put the turntable in, but you also need to cover that turntable so that your cake layers are not touching plastic. And, all those things, like those are the things that are challenging. You're not just throwing up a structure, you're layering it, and you have to think of, okay, is there a cake board that's going to go under here to support the next layer?
Right, exactly. It's almost like making two individual cakes, right? Like you make the cake that you think you're supposed to make because you know how to make a head of a sock monkey, but then you have to make a secondary cake to hide the additional pieces that you're using. It becomes very complicated very fast.
Yes.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite cake that you've made?
Oh my goodness. I mean, it's definitely not the best cake I've made, but I would say I sculpted a cake in the shape of my son for his first birthday because I wanted to challenge myself. I think till that point, I hadn't really made any human figures. I had, out of sugar.
Sure.
I had made, women for like a spa cake or things like that, but I had never tried to replicate a human. And I remember having him sit as a 1-year-old, and I took profile pictures and all those things. But then I didn't realize that one of my children has a total phobia of dolls. And so she wouldn't come into the room when we were cutting it. So it didn't turn out to be a fabulous cake, but it was just, it's kind of freeing when you're a cake designer to be able to come up with your own cake design.
Absolutely. I think that's maybe one of the funner parts of what we get to do. I do recall that cake, and I think it was absolutely fabulous. But I have to say, just like dog cakes, kid cakes, little baby cakes, I really struggle when we have to cut into them.
Yeah, no, that was the mistake. I mean, if I have to look over my entire career, I would have to say it's the alligator handbag, because that was probably one of the first cakes that I looked at after I was done, and I actually thought it really looked like a handbag.
Right.
Working with Marvelous Molds to make, because the first one I made for Craftsy, I didn't make it with a silicone mold or a silicone mat. I just made it by hand. But then I'm thinking, people aren't going to take the time to make every little scale. And so that was just, it's like when people say you can't really plan success in ways. I mean, that was like a phone call with the owner of Marvelous Molds and being like, I'm going on Craftsy and I need you to make this silicone mat. And we had never met, never spoken before. I had never designed anything outside of confetti cakes other than books. I mean, it's a miracle it all came to happen. So, but I think, if I was to look back on my whole career and also think of like images that people steal from my website, it's usually that one. Which isn't like a happy topic, but I mean,
Well, that's the reality.
If the shoe fits, right?
Yeah, it's the plus and the minus of having internet available to us, right? Everything's at our fingertips to take and do with what we like, I suppose. So, I think your hearse cake is one of my favorite cakes of yours that I have seen.
And it's purple. And you're partial to purple. I know that.
It's absolutely beautiful. And I think that it just is a great representation of a hyper-realistic cake. I mean, most of the cakes that you have made, it looks like you could literally just walk up and grab it and pick it up as if it were a purse, or, go pet the dog or put the shoe on. I mean, you just have so many amazing designs that are out there. I just absolutely adore what you've done with your creative side. And if anybody is interested, Handbag Cakes is available definitely on Craftsy, which is one of our sister sites. So feel free to pop over there. Maybe we can get a link for everybody to get over there. But it literally just looks like you could walk up, grab that purse, and head out the door. It's absolutely perfect.
I also love how you can customize. So, it's one thing if you teach a cake, sometimes obviously you can customize drip cakes, but it has the same structure, right? You're gonna drip it, you're gonna put sprinkles, you're going to do stuff. But you can change the handbag so easily with, once you have that structure, and then you can use a different kind of texture or different colors or different, tags for different people. I've made a duffel bag for my husband's 40th, and I put, wafer paper logos of all the countries he visited. So it's just a great way. I never like to teach, this is what you're going to make. I'm okay if someone, especially for the first time, wants to copy it exactly. That's why I teach. I love people to have success. But, even in our burger cake, we were talking about, you can make this into a chicken sandwich, or you can make it into the pizza burger cake that I originally made for my brother 20 years ago. So I just love the fact that people can put their own spin on, what I'm teaching.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what's so fun about burger cake like this is, and your shoes and purses, all of these cakes truly can be customized, and you can add something extra or you can leave something out. If you're running behind and you haven't planned accordingly, I guess they just don't get lettuce on their burger, right?
That's absolutely. There's so many ways that you can, and to be honest, even though I make cakes that are supposed to look like real things in life, every single time I make a cake, something goes wrong. And I think people are always shocked. It's like, okay, you've been doing this for how long? And sometimes I think even as people who have had, mild success in an industry, it's easy to have imposter syndrome, because it's like, okay, I've been doing this for 20 years, baking the same recipe, but it's raining out and, my fondant's too sticky or what, it's just so amazing to me. And to people who aren't in the industry, like when I do tell my husband I had a problem, he's like, of course you did, because I always do. Like, thanks.
Well, you are not the only one.
Okay, thank you.
Definitely not the only one. And it sometimes feel like we are reinventing the wheel when we don't need to. But I'll be honest, my memory is just not what it used to be. And I don't always remember what I did, 10 years ago to make something, and I'm, recreating it. It doesn't even matter if it's something I made yesterday or 10 years ago. There are moments where I'm just like, oh my gosh, why didn't I think I should have known this would work differently? But that's
I kind of don't believe you, because I feel like you know every technique ever, but okay.
No, I promise. I feel like, I feel like sometimes I just don't remember that I'm even a cake decorator, and I just don't remember what I did. I have a lot of stories. We should get together. So we do have another question, which is, when will the cheeseburger class be available? It usually takes around a month or so for our editing team and all the behind the scenes pieces to come together. But I promise you, keep an eye on our page. We will let you know as soon as it is available. Elisa does have lots of other classes on Craftsy, and there is a couple on creative cake design as well. If you're interested in checking those out before the burger cake comes out, that would be fabulous. Kelsey also has another question, and we did address this a little bit. How long does it take to make these cakes? And she says, for example, the one you made for your son for his birthday, do you have any concept of how long it took you to make your little boy's cake?
I mean, I know in terms of days, like it took 4 days, but I don't know in terms of hours.
Did you get any sleep?
Yes. I think I pulled an all-nighter just once, early in my. I can't do that anymore. But I do remember there was a snowstorm, and I was also taking care of my children, so I feel like it didn't go as smoothly as possible. But I think, and what I tried to teach in the classes and the videos is that it's all about a timeline. So, I started cakes working full-time in fashion, sometimes, going to pastry school too. So minus the kids, which is a huge minus, but I still had to be super organized. I would, bake all the cake. Let's say I'm making 3 cakes that week. I bake the cakes, I'd freeze them, which people are always like, oh, you freeze your cakes? It's like, no, that's the way you make cakes that stay fresh and all the flavors stay in there, and they're easier to sculpt. So anyway, the point is that I would have a timeline. And I think even when I make sugar sculptures, like in the shoe class, I also have a timeline. On day 1, you do this. On day 2, you do this. Because I know the average person isn't just at home working on your cakes all day. So normally, you just think of it as like, a few hours a day. And also
Absolutely.
the more experience you have, right? So I've had a lot of experience sculpting cakes. That was, let's see, he's 7 now. So that was 6 years ago. So I still had a lot of experience sculpting cakes. But yeah, each cake is still a challenge, especially when they are realistic and custom, and you just never know what to expect. But the more you could prepare, the better you'll be.
Absolutely. I think following some sort of timeline is super helpful because so many things pop up. And as you mentioned, something always goes wrong. So trying to be ahead of the game and starting the process a little early is always helpful. Although I will say, I feel like the earlier I start, just the more that I work on it, because
Yes.
there's so many things that you can do with cake to continue to elevate the way that it looks. And speaking of that, we have a question about what are some of the ingredients that you really like to use when making a hyper-realistic cake? Anything that you can think of that really adds to the realism?
Absolutely. So again, the beginning of my career, I knew about rolled fondant and maybe gum paste if I had that. And I always bought satinized gum paste, and it was perfect for some stuff, but then it would dry out. So I would say the number one thing that makes the cakes look realistic is the modeling chocolate. And so now more than not, I still buy the neutral colors of modeling chocolate, all the bright white, ivory, warm sand, just as like a neutral base. And the reason is because you could keep manipulating it. It will crust a little bit, but, getting all the, as I say, nooks and crannies of, the edge of the burger, or, being able to pull out some of the impression in the alligator mat and things like that. So I would say that's probably like the number one thing, in terms of, something edible that I use that has changed. Then there's, tons of equipment that I use, but even that, I'm pretty basic. I still love my scalpel and my paring knife, and I still use my grandmother's wooden rolling pin. So I don't know. I'm less about equipment and more about the products.
Absolutely. And I think modeling chocolate is by far my favorite medium as well.
And it
Exactly.
tastes good.
It tastes amazing.
Right.
It does exactly what you want it to do. It stays flexible but firm. It just has so many amazing qualities. And if any of you are looking for ideas with modeling chocolate, or how to make it yourself, or where to buy it, or all that good stuff, we have a couple of different lessons on creative cake design that talk all about modeling chocolate. I have another live event that talks about all the benefits of modeling chocolate and how wonderful it is and why. So if you are new to modeling chocolate, I know that it is new to the market within the last few years in the sense of being a commercial product, but it really has been around a lot longer than that, people making it at home. So I have a recipe for modeling chocolate on Creative Cake Design if you'd like to look that up as well. It's actually fairly easy to make, and I've got a lot of tips and tricks for how to adjust the recipe for where you are in the world as well, for the sake of humidity or dryness. So I encourage you to check those out as well. One of the other things that I didn't mention earlier on, Elisa, is just for people joining us today, they get our free edible glaze recipe, which I wanted to make sure people knew. Please download the recipe. I have tulips here with me on set. That's what you see on the recipe as well, but it makes such a difference. Like, you have a matte object and you have a shiny object. And the beauty of this is it's two things that you can, well, it's three ingredients. It's alcohol, it's water, and it's corn syrup. And then it literally dries so shiny and it is smooth. It is not tacky. It dries really, it depends on your environment a little bit, but here in Colorado, we're pretty dry, and it literally dries within like an hour. So it's got this beautiful shine to it. I would encourage you to download the recipe if you haven't already. This is a wonderful edible glaze that you can either be sprayed or painted on, depending upon your application and what you're doing with it. But I find that this is one of the other items that I really like to use when making hyper-realistic cakes, because it really does make a difference when you are trying to replicate, like the burger, for instance. Burgers are juicy and greasy and they just have a lot of shine to them. So, it's important to get that extra sheen, where maybe on our bun, we want something a little bit more matte. Those contrasts of colors and textures and different sheens on our items are really helpful.
And my pickle.
Oh, yes, on the pickle too. Oh my goodness, look at that pickle, you guys. It is.
You could see the shine, but
yeah, no, we can see it. I promise we can see it. It's absolutely fantastic. I'm just amazed by all of the texture that you have on the burger and the pickle. Everything that's there just looks so realistic.
No, I mean, you're so right. I mean, I remember making a Louis Vuitton bag. I didn't even have my bakery. I was making it out of my apartment. So again, this is going over 20 years ago. And there was that line of Louis Vuitton bags that is like patent leather. It was called Vernis. And I was close to making your recipe, but I really was missing a lot. Like, you took all the guesswork out of it for me, but I used just pure corn syrup, and it was pulling, and it was tacky, and it was just, too many trial and errors. So using your recipe on the pickle, on the burger, and there are a bunch of commercial glazes, but they're just not, you just get the sense like, they're not healthy, they're tacky, they ruin your brushes. I mean, the fact that you can make this your own, you can make it thicker, you can make it thinner, and brush it on, spray it on, you save me a lot of time.
Okay.
And money.
Yeah. It's sometimes it's a matter of you need something in the moment. And, I knew that I needed to spray something, and I had run out of one of those commercial brands. You kind of just put your head to the game and try to figure out what in the world you could use. And like yourself, I had played with corn syrup for a while, and you're right, it's super tacky. It takes a while for that to really like hold up. It tends to drip.
Yeah, it doesn't dry. It doesn't dry without the alcohol. It's like, yeah.
Yep, absolutely. It kind of made sense to put the two together and make that work. Are there any other products that you really like that are helpful in the process? I know we talked about the molds, and of course now we've talked about glaze. Am I missing anything?
I mean, it wouldn't be me if I didn't mention my scalpel. I mean, I know I mentioned it already, but my number 11 scalpel, and I've taught classes and people are like, oh yeah, I have my X-Acto knife. No, That's not a scalpel, okay? A scalpel has a flat end, which I use almost as much as the, sharp end, and I use a number 11 blade, which is I think probably the pointiest, sharpest, and it's so delicate and sharp that there's nothing else like it. So, I don't know. I mean, you can use a million things, but
yeah,
if I was on that desert island and I had to make a cake, I'm bringing my scalpel with me.
And I would imagine being the daughter of an orthopedic surgeon.
There is that. I know. Sorry.
A little more handy than others, especially in the early days. But yes. That's fantastic. Yeah, I have some favorite tools as well. There's definitely that whole deserted island thing that I would not walk away without my Dresden tool. But yeah. All right. So in case you guys haven't noticed, there are lots of comments in the comment section, and I am doing my best to get to all of them. But if you have a question, I would encourage you to get it in the comment section, because we only have about 15 more minutes of time with Elisa, and I want to make sure that your question gets answered. I saw Nicole commented that it's incredible how you have combined fashion and cake into one. I couldn't agree more, Nicole. And Elisa is like the master, in my opinion, of fashion cakes, and has just done an amazing job. And clearly your background speaks for itself when it comes to being able to design these cakes. Tell us a little bit about your design process. What do you go through to design a hyper-realistic cake, like a shoe or a handbag or a burger?
Well, I think one of the things that is from my fashion days is tear sheeting. So, when you work for a fashion house, it's really important to know what the trends are, what they're going to be, and how you can make them different. And so it's the same process, but I think what people might be shocked to know is that I'm so not a fashionista. I wear running sneakers and jeans every day. And I think, as one of my friends said, I have that college kid look, which I don't know if that was an insult, but I do love pattern and color and all those things. But the starting process is always to tear sheet. And if I'm going to be really crazy and I'm at a store or a mall, I'll actually look at it. I remember making a computer cake for a child way back when, again, before Google, so I couldn't be like, which Apple IIe is it? And I went to the home of the child and took photos, and so any kind of reference is the most important part to getting it started. And then noticing all those details. I mean, I'm nuts. I'm critical and I'm nuts. Just ask my family. I mean, you can't be like, who else is noticing, the edging of a bun or like the stitching of a, I always say I teach the handbag class in a culinary school, and I always say when the kids leave the classroom, when they get on the subway, because that in New York City, that's a very easy way to see lots of people at once from all walks of life, and right. You'll never look at a bag the same way.
Of course. And you mentioned the edging of your burger. That's probably my favorite part of that burger, because you just know that is so realistic to what we know of with a bun. I mean, it's just fantastic. That is what sets that bun apart for me than any other burger cake out there I have ever seen. It is fantastic.
Okay, but the onions are really cool. I just want to say, I know you're not here, but like I was super proud of the onions because
as it should be.
They really look like onions.
It seriously looks like we could just take a bite out of that burger. I am so impressed with the textures. I know that I have said it a couple of times now, but you just absolutely killed this cake. I mean, this is so spot on perfect. The colors, the textures, the onions are amazing. Did I see a tomato in there too?
Yes, they're tomatoes.
Oh my gosh, underneath, yes.
Tomato.
Look at that, you guys, the glaze, the little seeds, the little pockets within the tomato. I mean, that is just unreal. It blows my mind. And now we have a close-up of your pickle as well and all the texture on the pickle. It's just fantastic. You are the best. Seriously.
You're so nice.
I can't wait to take this class. I'm so excited.
Well, you'll tell me. And one other last thing I want to say about realistic cakes, and I do think it helps, is it's all about color. So, and what I mean by that is I know there are a million different kinds of breads and pickles, but you know, if you're using ketchup, I don't know about your kid, but my kids are obsessed with ketchup. And so, and we talk about this in the burger class, you know, using red gel to dye the royal icing, but just putting a touch of blue in it is what gives it that, if I could say, Heinz ketchup look. And then, of course, your glaze, which makes it real. But, you know, if you, even the differentiation between the tomato and the ketchup, I would say, and I'm sure this does come from my years of doing color and fashion and textile, but I often think when people say, should I go to pastry school? I would argue that probably the most important class you could ever take is a color class.
Yeah, agreed. Absolutely. I probably take more art classes than I do baking or, you know, any sort of decorating class. That the translation over between art and obviously your art background, super helpful here. But I take more art classes than I do anything else. I've done, you know, glass blowing, for instance, translate over to isomolten sugar extremely well. So I think if someone's going to, you know, really want to heighten their skills when it comes to making a realistic cake, obviously taking your class is number one, but, you know, taking any sort of art class for color or for design, textures, those types of things, they are just priceless. They are so helpful in the design process as well as in the execution part of it. All right, we are winding down. I don't see any other. Sam says that is one big burger. Yes, it is.
And we talk about the size because obviously you don't want to go through all this work and make a tiny little burger. Now, if you want to trick people and have a real burger and make a small cake burger, I love that idea. But for this guy, we made it obviously oversized because we want to feed a lot of people. And, you know, whether you're celebrating a birthday or Father's Day, you want to be able for it to be a centerpiece at your party. So it is big.
Yeah, absolutely. But you know what? When I was growing up, there was a restaurant nearby that had a gigantic, like 20-pound burger that if you could sit and eat the whole thing on your own, you didn't have to pay for it, which was like ridiculous. I know. There were several people that attempted it. What we did as kids growing up is we would all just chip in our money together and we would divide it up and eat it, just to say that we had the big 20-pound burger. But yeah, so it reminds me of back in the day when I was just a wee little teenager.
And you know, there are all sorts of burgers, but I personally love a bistro burger. So, obviously, if you're a fan of, a few patties, you can layer them with cheese in between. If you like a square patty, it's very easy to customize this cake for whoever it is out there that loves their meat or veggie burgers.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to I don't want to leave out any of our vegan friends. You could turn that into any type of burger you would like.
Well, absolutely. If you use fondant, I'm not sure about gum paste and probably not modeling chocolate, but fondant at least is completely vegan, gluten-free. And there's some delicious vegan cake recipes. I have two, one that's a delicious chocolate and one that's banana walnut. But obviously you can make a carrot cake, and if you're a vegan devotee, I'm sure you really know your recipes. But so you can make this cake vegan. Absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And even just, replicate that Morningstar veggie burger, right?
Yeah, an egg sandwich. Oh my God, that's amazing. And use your glaze. I mean, there's no other way to get that gloss on the egg yolk if you're making a fried egg than Rachael's glaze. Amazing.
Well, I appreciate that. It definitely helps when it comes to making a realistic cake with shine. So, well, Elisa, our time is almost up. I'm so sad. I love our little play dates when we get to chit chat and talk all things cake. It is so fun, and I am just absolutely thrilled to know that you are in the studio. Your class is filmed and it'll be out to our editing team soon. And then, of course, out to all of our members so they can learn how to make this amazing burger cake. I just absolutely adore you, and I'm so grateful to have you not only as a guest on Creative Cake Design, but as a friend as well. I appreciate you being here and sharing your knowledge and information with all of our members and guests here at Creative Cake Design. Please do look for Elisa's classes. We popped a few different links in the comment section if you're looking for some of her older classes that we have on the site. They are here. And of course, we have her burger cake coming up very soon. I promise you, we just wanted to give you a little sneak peek of what we're working on and what we have going on in the studio. So with that, we say thank you, Elisa, and we hope to see you back in the studio very soon.
Absolutely. I'd love it.
All right. Yeah. For anyone who wants to stick around as a gold member, I have a live event coming up in another half hour. We are going to be making a realistic oyster. Look at these guys. So you can sign up and join and learn how to make oyster from scratch. We have all sorts of fun little tips and tricks, including using the glaze that I used before. And just for signing up for that tutorial, you get a recipe for the ice, the Jell-O ice that you see there. It gives you all of the measurements you need to be able to make that. It's a really fun class, and so I hope you'll join us. And yeah, with that, we'll say goodbye to Elisa. Safe travels, and we'll see you in the studio again soon.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.